Pero una vez Semana Santa, yo pienso que si utilizas tu inteligencia, puede más o menos funcionar de manera regular con vacuna, ¿eh? Hay
Sí.
que, porque yo le he dicho, me han tocado el COVID en julio, ¿eh?
Sí, me contaste.
Ja, niet goed lachen, hè?
Mm. Tuviste
Ja, bueno.
fiebre, cosas así, ¿no?
¿Eh?
Pauter, Jean-Claude, ya estamos live en YouTube.
Ok,
Ok.
2 minutos. Entonces, son 45 minutos para la presentación, Jean-Claude, y luego tenemos 45 minutos para preguntas.
Vale,
¿Ya? ¿Te parece?
vale,
Ok,
de
súper.
acuerdo. ¿Qué hora es ahora en Chile?
Son las 11 ahora.
Ah, ok.
La diferencia no es muy grande, son 4 horas de diferencia nomás.
Vale,
Sí,
vale.
sí.
No, y cuando hay bueno, las preguntas, la gente me puede pedir lo que quieran, ¿eh? De lo que es Open Science en Europa o Open Access.
Ajá, ok, súper.
Hasta ahora bueno, yo sigue siendo las cosas y hay muchas cosas que se pasan con la nueva comisión que es
Ok.
interesante a saberlo, pero vamos a ver
Sí,
si le interesa o no, ¿eh?
ok, súper. Sí, vamos a ver cuántas preguntas vienen sobre ese tema.
Vale, vale.
Súper.
Marlene, el YouTube está ok.
Sí, 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 es lo que le
Ya.
acabo. Sí.
Ya
Ok.
estamos.
Gracias.
¿Estamos listos? Vamos a empezar. Muy buenos días, muy buenas tardes. Soy Walter Chalier, director de la Biblioteca Hernán Santa Cruz de CEPAL, Naciones Unidas. Tengo el gran agrado de hoy presentar otro webinar de nuestras series de webinar que empezó hace más de 5 años sobre ciencia abierta y datos abiertos. Y tengo el gran agrado de presentar hoy a ustedes Jean-Claude Burgelman. Jean-Claude Burgelman is currently part-time professor at the University of Brussels, Faculty of Social Sciences and Solvay Business School. As former head of the Open Science Unit, DG Research and Innovation, European Commission, he was responsible for open science and data policies. Jean-Claude joined the European Commission in 1999 as a visiting scientist in the Joint Research Center, the Institute of Prospective Technological Studies, where he became head of the Information Society unit in 2005. In January 2008, he moved to the Bureau of European Policy Advisors, attached to the President of the European Commission, as advisor for innovation policy. In 2008, he joined DG RTD as advisor and then head of unit in charge of top-level advisory boards like the European Research and Innovation Area Board, the Innovation for Growth Group, and the European Forum for Forward-Looking Activities. Until 2000, he was full professor of communication technology policy at the Free University of Brussels, as well as director of the Center for Studies on Media, Information and Telecommunication, and was involved in science and technology assessment. He has been visiting professor at the University of Antwerp, the European College of Bruges, and the University of South Africa, and sits on the board of several academic journals. He chaired the World Economic Forum's Global Agenda Council on Innovation and was a member of its Science Advisory Committee. Welcome, Jean-Claude. Very happy to have you with us. You're going to talk today about open science and open scholarship in Europe and the rest of the world. No way back. That's quite a thought-provoking title, so we're very much looking forward to your presentation. And as always, the format is that there will be a 45 minutes presentation followed by 45 minutes for your questions. Sus preguntas, sus comentarios lo pueden compartir a través del chat en el Webex. Mi colega Claudia Vilches y yo recogemos las preguntas y luego vamos a presentar las preguntas a Jean-Claude para tener una conversación que seguramente va a ser muy interesante después de su presentación. Jean-Claude, the floor is yours, and thank you so much for accepting our invitation and for taking time to give this presentation on open science and open scholarship. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much, Wouter, for this invitation. Welcome to everyone that I cannot see who is sitting on the other side of the internet and of your computer screen. I will do the presentation in English because it is simply the language in which I've been working on open science and open access for the last 10 to 15 years. But if later on, si hay preguntas en castellano, lo puede responder también o puede hacer un esfuerzo para responder en castellano. But it's easier for me to do the analysis in English and to do the whole presentation in English. So if I assume I have to share the screen again. There it is. So the title of my presentation, and thanks Wouter for the invitation, and it's really a pity we have to do it digital and not analog, because I would have loved part of the world as I have good friends and good memories there, but anyway, that's for later, so it won't run away. So the title is indeed, since I'm no longer a civil servant, I was responsible for open science, open access and open data for the last 8 years at the European Commission. And we did a lot of policies, and I pushed a lot of policies there with my team and with my hierarchy. But since I am no longer a civil servant and an academic again, I can be a bit more provocative and a bit less diplomatic. So the title is indeed that open science and open scholarship is there to stay. It is happening in Europe and in many other parts of the world. And then the provocation is, of course, that there is no way back. Open science will be science of the 21st century, and it will be there faster than we think. A lot of the slides that I will present to you, you can have the presentation later on and circulate it. These slides were made a month ago, but the situation is going so fast that you would actually need to update them on an almost weekly basis. And for example, I'm sure you all were aware that this week, Nature, one of the most prestigious journals, one of the most closed journals also in subscription way, has announced that they are going for full open access. So you can now, as a scientist, you can publish in Nature and having immediately access. Of course, the price is high, but that's a separate discussion, I would say. But the fact that one of the leading journals in the world has decided after years of discussions, and I can tell you I have been in discussions with them many times, I would never have thought that so fast they would go in the route of open access. You also see the success of open access editors in Europe, like for example Frontiers, which is now the fifth most cited of the editors in open access that is around the world. So these things are going very fast, and we should update our work therefore on an almost regular basis. So let me develop my argument why it is important, open science, why open scholarship is important, why it is going very fast, how it is going, and that rather than resisting it, we should embrace it for the sake of science and for the sake of for the world as well. So the key messages are, as you can see them there, synthesized that the way science is changing is going very fast, and it goes to a modus operandi of open science. In particular, the coronavirus has one of the positive collateral damages of the corona pandemic, and the way science has reacted to it has given a big push towards open science. I'll come back to that later on in the presentation. In going forward to this open science route, Europe, but also several other continents and regions are taking policies to support it, to push it, to publish it, to make it possible, which makes me conclude that very fast open science will be the science of the 21st century. It will have a big effect, of course, on the way we do science, but it will also have a big effect on the nature of science. Science will mainly, in 2030, and that is, of course, an arbitrary date. It's as a provocation, but it goes very fast. The move to open science support a move towards science becoming much more data-driven and data-specific, and publishing less the centerpiece of publishing articles, less the centerpiece of science rather than the data-drivenness. And then finally, the last important point is that universities, and I assume that a lot of the people in the audience are from universities or associations which belong to universities like libraries, it is therefore absolutely necessary for universities to invest, hopefully with the support of their national governments, to invest heavily in data stewardship and in skills needed to make sense out of open access, open data, and so on. So this is in a nutshell what I will tell you, and the rest of the story or the rest of the presentation is trying to flesh that out. Now, if I do this talk, I mean, the world of science tends to be a little bit conservative. Scientists are very progressive when it goes about their own field and pushing the boundaries of their own field. But when you tell them what is going on in the world of science as such, and that the modus operandi is changing, they tend to be rather conservative and saying, yeah, but you know, it doesn't go that fast, and the world is not changing that fast. We have to see this change from analog science, to put it simple, to digital science as part of a much wider change, which is absolutely spectacular. This is the most recent overview that I found of data production by some of the big services that you can find on the internet, where you can see how many data are being produced per minute by some of these big producers there. Now, if you see all the figures there, this is quite staggering. The production of data is simply exploding, and what we see happening in science is exactly the same. Unfortunately, we don't have the data. We have data about physics, we have data about biology, but we don't have aggregate data. So the world is changing from an analog way of things to a digital way. That's the first message of this slide. But secondly, I also would like to, and this is important for Europe, I would like to, and also for Latin America and the rest of the world, I would like to draw your attention on, if you look at who is behind, these are the big players, 95% of the big players that you see there are belonging to one continent, namely North America. And that is not a big conspiracy, it is just a fact of life. And that is why in Europe, when we saw the analysis that a lot of the digital activities were happening by non-European companies, and when we were thinking about, okay, this science will go digital as well, we must avoid that also in science, the key players of the future are only belonging to one continent, and we must make sure we have our own European players. And that is a very important thing to keep in mind. The analysis that the digital world is de facto dominated by one or two continents in the meantime. China joined up very fast there. That analysis has led European decision makers and has allowed us to push, for example, for the European Open Science Cloud. So I'll come back to that later on in the presentation. So the times are changing, and that explains why open science is worldwide an enormous topic. I did a search a few weeks ago on the number of hits. If you type in open science in Google, well, you see there the volume 3.6 billion. So it is quite staggering. And open data is, I think, 3.2 billion, and fair data, which is a format of data, is 1.4 billion hits on Google. Okay, we know that all these hits are not pure, and you should sift them down. But even if you halve it, the numbers are still staggering, because 20 years ago, if you would do that search, of 10 years ago, 20 years ago, Google search didn't exist. 10 years ago, if you would do that search, you would certainly have less hits. So you see that the topic is worldwide on the end of a lot of people, of a lot of policymakers, of a lot of academics. And what you also see, and that is an argument that we used, that we took very serious in Europe, is that in the meantime, where Europe has been on the forefront, I would say, quite a few times of open access and open science, in deploying policies and initiatives to support it, most of European, we call it competitors, colleagues and competitors, have been waking up in the meantime. So it is no longer so that only European policymakers are busy with open science or open data. The US is moving ahead very fast, and in particular China is moving forward very fast. We announced in Europe in 2016 that we wanted a European Open Science Cloud to be the environment for public research data. The same year, 1 year later, in 2020, at the end of this year, we will finally create the association to make it possible. In 2017, China announced its announced its plans to create a Chinese Open Science Cloud, and they have and the Chinese Academy of Science has a final an operational cloud structure available, an infrastructure available since 2018. Just to give you a flavor of the speed with which not only Europe, but in particular also the other powerhouses in science are taking up the challenges. So this is actually the macro picture. Huh? So it is being discussed worldwide, but if you then zoom down, it's also a reality, open science, with scientists. If you look at the growth of open access, and this is the figure that this is the only study that I know that gives the aggregate figure over the world. Well, that clearly shows you how important open access in terms of publishing and in terms of volume of publishing is becoming, not only as a producer of the article, but also as a user. And you see the figures there. We anticipate that with the current growth trends, the worldwide production of science by 2025 will be 44% in open access, and the worldwide consumption of articles will be 78% open access titles, which is quite logical because it is much more easily to consult. It has been shown that publishing in open access makes sure that my product is seen 3 times more than if I published it in a subscription journal. So you can easily see there that on the ground, scientists actually are already publishing in open access. So the whole discussion, yes or no, is a discussion of the past. It is simply not relevant. It is going into that direction. And that, of course, has to do with the fact that there are a lot of benefits associated with open access. And that actually has led Daniel Roper, who until the summer of 2019 was the CEO of Springer Nature, when we were together in a discussion in Switzerland for the World Conference of Science Journalists, publicly, those figures, he used them and he said, well, you know, if you would have to reinvent the publication system today, starting from scratch, there is absolutely no doubt in my mind, said Daniel Roper, CEO of the second largest publisher in the world, there is absolutely no doubt that I would design it in a full open access way. So the problem is the transition from the system which we have to open access. The problem is not open access. The same goes for open data. If you ask scientists how their position is towards open data, and you explain them the benefits, the majority of them, the overwhelming majority of them, and you see them there listed, will tell you that indeed open data is the way forward, that they are willing to accept that it is mandatory, that they are willing to accept that it is even penalized if you don't do it, if it is mandatory, and so forth. A recent overview of a recent survey by Frontiers, the open access publisher, with 25,000 scientists around the globe, with regard to how they reacted to the COVID pandemic, is giving you exactly the same figure. Researchers do not have a problem with making their data openly available because they see the benefits of it. And on top of that, working towards fair open data, which is the standard behind open data, because otherwise they are not useful. On that, to make that work, thousands of specialists in the world are working on formats, on standards, metadata, on trying to get agreements which span the globe and so on. So it is a reality of life. Open access, open data is not an exotic thing being discussed by some policymakers who do not know what to do. It is a reality, it is a fact of life, just like Facebook is a fact of your social life. Open access, open data is a fact of your research life. And as I said, European policies are very much on the ball here and are very much pushing for that. This figure gives you how the policies have changed the last over the course of less than 10 years, actually. So all the policies of the European Union, in those days still 28 members, started with a very modest proposal for a pilot on gold or green open access in 2008. So the publications coming from the framework program that sponsors research were put in a pilot to see how scientists would react to having their publications available in open access or not. A very modest, very timid, almost not known policy, which was followed by one or two functionaries who had to look after the successful implementation of that. During the years, the whole discussion, yes, no, will it be good or bad for science, started, but de facto, since 2014, and in particular since 2016, when the new commissioner, modus, came in, the policies of the European Union were going full force ahead towards a full open science policy. So 10 years later, the policies towards open access are mandatory for publications as well as for data. Exceptions are possible if the research deals with health, privacy, military issues, but it is no longer possible to escape the obligation of a data management plan, which you have to submit if you want money from the European Commission to do research, and that data management plan has to be compatible with the FAIR standards. FAIR being the format for data to be accessible, interoperable, and reusable, not only for man, but only for machines, so that all the data that we publish emanating from publicly funded research is findable by machines in formats that can be read across the disciplines and across the independent from the producers of the data. So in 10 years' time, the policy changed from a relatively small application area to a completely full-blown policy to support open science as a fact, as a standard for European research. And the fact that this was done by the European Commission in synergy with a few member states who were also following this new development, in particular the Dutch, the Germans, Scandinavians, that explains why you had a bit of a snowball effect in Europe, that a lot of countries aligned to these policies, because by accepting what you see there on the screen, it means that they subscribe to the policies, but also that they started to translate their policies into the European policy objectives into the national objectives of many of the member states. So today it is fair to say that most of the member states in Europe have national offices for open science policy, are making open data fair, mandatory, are pushing towards open access. And okay, the geometry is variable according to the country, but on average you can say that what you see here for the European Commission has become not the standard, but has become common ground for many, if not most, of the member states. And as I said, well, the future of these policies in the next framework program, which starts at the end of the year, they will even go further into the direction that I just said, so that the obligations for open access become mandatory and eligible in the proposals of the Commission. And that, of course, also explains the whole activity of Plan S, which is a coalition of funders pushing for open access in publications. Now, a second thing that has happened in the meantime is, of course, that as part of the policy towards open data, in 2016 we raised the question, but how are we going to manage this? And who shall manage it, and on what condition? Bearing in mind that in Europe we don't have any significant data player or a cloud provider, and that most of the big boys are not in, if not all, are not in Europe. And that led to the creation of the European Open Science Cloud. It has been a long history. I've, together with my colleagues, published a few articles on it where you can trace back this history. But it boils down to the following, that in order to acknowledging that we don't have the companies to do it ourselves, the European Open Science Cloud will become the mandatory environment to manage the data emanating from publicly funded research. So it is not a repository, it is not an infrastructure, it is a way to make sure that what is produced by European public research is managed according to the principles and the values European public policymakers think are important. So it is a distributed system which federates what is available in different member states across the disciplines, and which concentrates on the rules of the game and the rules of access and the rules of utilization and so forth. So if you can, the easiest way to memorize it is that every country has an airport. So it's a metaphor from air traffic. Every country has an airport, every country has plane, every country has its own airport. But once you take off the plane, you do it according to the rules of the European air traffic control system, in this case, the European Open Science Cloud. So it is controlling the rules of the flying, and it is not saying that how your airport should be built. Of course, it is a bit more complicated than that, but it boils down to that. Now, the 17th of December of this year, all this was preparatory work done by the Commission together with expert groups and a complicated story. But anyway, it boils down that this year, 17th of December, a not-for-profit association has been created and will be launched to take forward the rollout of the European Open Science Cloud starting next year. And that is a very important milestone, because it has been followed closely in the rest of the world. In the meantime, as I said, China has an open science cloud. The Australians have something which is parecido to a European open science cloud. So you see the same happening in several regions of the world. And that's a very significant way forward and a very significant development, because in the end, all these initiatives should and could be merged into what one can call a global open science cloud. And that is, of course, where I think we as scientific community should aim. We should not make the mistake we made with, let's say, the private search engines and the private social media, the private social platforms on the internet, whereby we use the content, but we do not control it. Now, by aggregating all these cloud initiatives into a global open science cloud, we can make sure that the scientific system of the world is at least managed according to the principles of science, which is in the end the principles of a commons. Now, I'm not saying that this is happening, but there are very interesting indications to be noted. In particular, next year, sponsored by the Chinese Academy of Science, all these regional science cloud initiatives will come together to discuss precisely how we can federate all these federations into a global open science cloud. This is also what we push forward in UNESCO and in United Nations circles, but and it gets some traction. International organizations like CODATA and RDA are very much, but there is still a lot of work to be done, because it's not a trivial exercise, of course. Because what you actually do with these structures is that you do not put the control, so to speak, and the management principles in the hands of the private sector. They can contribute, of course, but they are not in steering it, nor do you put it in control of the public sector, well, or the public political sector. It is system managed in first and foremost for but globally. And the reason why it goes so fast, why there is an acceleration the last 5 to 6 years, has of course nothing to do with the fantastic activities we did at the Commission. It is simply because it is in the air, and increasingly the scientific ecosystem, funders, scientists, universities see the benefit of open science, because they see it as a system which is collaborative. It is a system which can improve quality and impact, a system which allows you better and more efficient sharing of resources. Because if you think about it, the editor-in-chief of Nature, the former editor-in-chief of Nature, Philip Campbell, once told me a few years ago, because he has been replaced, he's retired, he told me that up to 70%, at some point in time, up to 70% of the articles published in Nature cannot be reproduced because the data are not findable, are not interoperable, or are not accessible. Now, that's quite crazy, because all the money, and most of it is public money, that is needed to make these articles, and which is used to produce the data and so forth, all that money is a one-shot investment. You cannot reuse it, you cannot reproduce it. So that's a completely crazy system. So open science is not only an it's actually not even an ideological standpoint. Open is better than closed. It is also very pragmatic. It leads you to more efficiency, to more reproductivity, and so on. And that is actually the arguments that the killer arguments that we can use to defend open science, is that it is a better return of investment of all the investments that we make in research and in innovation. And when we worked together in the last year with some of your colleagues as well, there was this fantastic study produced by a Latin American scholar, Norori, that the economic impact of the human genome sequencing, which is actually a massive open science endeavor, if you want to call it that way, without the people behind the human genome calling it that way. Well, if you look at the economic impact it has, it's quite mind-boggling. 1 billion economic output, it created 4 million jobs, and so on. And that because you allow others to reuse the work done by someone else. That's actually as simple as that. So it is not a massive investment that you need to make that kind of massive return of investment necessary. It also, open science also allow a much faster circulation of ideas. It's quite logical. We have in Europe 22 million small and medium enterprises that for the moment, or in a non-open access system, do not have access to the latest views and insights from science. Well, if that is open access available, it is logical that that knowledge will be consulted much more quicker, much more faster by these SMEs. If only 1% of 22 million SMEs start a company or a new company because they found a fantastic idea for free in a scientific journal, well, you have created a lot of startups without doing any additional effort. It also offers more transparency of the science system, and that is also a no-brainer. If the data that I use for my research have to be published in a format machines and people can find and consult them, I will think twice when I want to cheat with the data. So it is not only open science does not only guarantee much more control and less probability for erroneous results. It is also showing to the taxpayer, who is still financing most of the research, at least in the world. If you take the world as a global entity, well, it allows him to see what the value for his money. So in Europe, the aggregate amount of the aggregate amount of public money for research is around 120 billion per year. So think about it, it's not trivial. So the taxpayer has the right to know what happens to that, but also if 120 billion of research is made available for reuse on a yearly basis, the cumulative effect of it is fantastic. So it is quite astonishing. Every time I say it, I think the same thing. It is quite astonishing that for so many years, all these billions have been invested and then thrown away, so to speak, because you cannot reuse the data that were by this system. And then finally, because an open data and open science system also allows you to much more easily do cross-disciplinary research, which is exactly what we need if you look at the challenges that are coming to us as societies. I'm thinking here in particular of climate change and so on. And that explains, I think, why in Europe you see so much activities, why you see the universities changing, the publishing houses changing, the university associations going into the direction of open science, and why you see, for example, at policy level, in every country, national policy bureaus being created, a European umbrella association has been created, and so on. It also explains that the new Commissioner for Research and Science, Mrs. Gabriel, even in the hearings in the European Parliament, she immediately made a few strong statements as top political representative for open science that go in the direction of fully developing it, and even more important, the President of the European Commission, and that is the first time that I know, at least in the history of the European Commission that the President of the Commission makes in a keynote speech to the World Economic Forum in this respect in Davos, full support towards science initiatives like the European Open Science Cloud, creating trusted spaces for researchers and so forth. So the topic is no longer somewhere in the corner of some policymakers. It is now of top level ambition of. It is one of the top level ambitions of even the presidency of the European Commission. And it is important in that respect, and it is for policymakers across the globe that are watching Europe. It is really important to understand that this Commission, so the lady is called President Ursula von der Leyen, that this Commission is not a Commission that will go for business as usual, and which is very strong on defending European interests and European values, including in data, including in science. And already yesterday, the first visible signs of this new policy has been announced by launching the data strategy of the Data Governance Act. The consultation on that has been launched yesterday, and it clearly goes into the direction that, well, data is important for science, data is important for the world, for the society. So we should in some way find a way to make sure that it is also managed according to our interests and according to our principles. And that means that, for example, the European Open Science Cloud will get full support in that respect, because for the little world of science, it is the way forward to fulfill the ambitions of this Commission. Now, as I said, in my view, what is the real killer application, so to speak, for open science in terms of taking away most of the reticences in the scientific community towards the new ways of working, of sharing and so forth, is what we have been seeing, is what has happened in the scientific world as a response to the coronavirus. Because if you analyze what has happened, how the science system reacted to it, it is absolutely mind-boggling, and it is staggering, and it all goes into the direction of we are changing the way we work into a new way called open science. Now, look at the different elements there. All publications that are made on corona and on finding viruses and so forth, almost all of them are immediately made available, even by the subscription journals and the subscription publishers for open consultation in controlled repositories, in particular the World Health Organization is overlooking one. So at the moment there are 170,000 of these articles in full open access available, without any question, without any discussion. Most of the data that are used for that are being shared between the different consortia, between the different research labs, so that they can build on each other's knowledge, which is actually de facto an open data approach in fair format. At the same time, we see a massive explosion in preprints. Why? Because that accelerates the circuit altogether. So what we have been advocating for years, open access, open data, no paywalls, has happened in less than 3 months and became a fact of life of one of the biggest scientific communities that we have, namely the life science community. And that, if you follow the discussion, if you talk to the people that are in the field, that what you notice here is that due to this collaborative approach, an open approach, this is paramount to explain why in less than a year, 10 times faster than normal, we already have 3 to 4 vaccines being announced as efficient very soon. So scientists on the ground have seen that open science is not a policy game. It is a reality that helps you to come up with better and faster responses to the big challenges, like in this case, Corona. So it is probably the best user case ever for advocating for an open science approach. And therefore, if you follow the discussions in Europe on how should we organize the stream around health research, you clearly see that most of the policies being discussed in many of the member states are completely shifting away from closed to open, from non-formatted or non-fair data to fair data. So Corona has, in my view, had at least one fantastic positive collateral damage, and that is the realization that open science, as I say there, is better science, and in this case saves lives. And therefore, it is very easy well, it's not very easy, but it is relatively easy to accept that 2020, with regard to open science, is an irreversible moment in the development. And that's why I say in the beginning, there is no way back, not because it is pushed so much, but because it has simply demonstrated its value. And on top of that, there is a second consideration which is becoming much more and more obvious in the discussions on science and the future of science and so forth, that most of what we do in this world will become a data point due to the Internet of Everything. And as a result, everything will be researchable, which means that everything that is researchable can become also science and can be reproducible. Already today, 2 years ago, last year, we made a study in the European Commission to figure out what is the cost of non-reproducible data, and the opportunity costs there for science are considered, not having them available in a fair format, 10 billion a year. So the whole idea that all science becomes data-driven, and if the data underlying that data-drivenness are not reproducible, not fair, the costs incurred are gigantic, will only push the momentum that we see now, that with Corona, that it is not only leading to faster science and better science because you have quicker responses, but that it will be simply no other way to choose in the future because of the trends that are just listed there. And of course, all this trend to data-driven science will only accelerate with artificial intelligence. I don't have the time here to explain it in detail, but it is self-evident. Artificial intelligence is data science in the end, built on massive amount of data and producing even more data. Well, you get a kind of a snowball effect, which is no longer possible to stop. And therefore, and this is some of my concluding slides, is that I think it is very important for universities and funders around the world to anticipate and make sure we do not lose the opportunities of data-driven science. It is really very that and that's what is happening in Europe, that every research project which is funded should have a mandatory research data management plan, that a European Open Science Cloud or a Latin American Open Science Cloud or whatever cloud, as long as it fits the political reality of a country, of a continent, should be a place where in between public and private, these data are managed according to the principles of a science commons. It also means that we should push for having not only the data, but the whole research flow, software, lab notebooks, and so forth, being reusable and reproducible, compliant with FAIR. That we should push for smart deals with publishing companies to go into the route of open access. The transformative deals in Europe are one way of doing it. The deal elsewhere made in the Netherlands is another way of doing it. What Nature announced recently is actually is not even a deal, because they took the initiative themselves and went much faster. And we should, of course, make sure that in this explosion of data, we embed in the architecture of the soft and of the data services compliance with the values that are considered important. meaning that what we are trying to do in Europe is to push for compliance with the general data protection rules into the software so that ad hoc instead of post hoc compliance with the principles is there. And that is what I would say, that is in a nutshell what I wanted to say with regard to the evolutions of open science, open access, and so forth. And it fits perfectly well, this whole evolution towards data-driven science and the explosion of possibilities fits perfectly well with what you see happening more and more in the scientific field. And that is, of course, an observation that I share, that I took from people professionally following how science is going. But it is clearly so that more and more science becomes a data-driven activity where is only one of the products and not the other way around, which it used to be. So it fits with, if you want, the new sociology of scientific activity, which is no longer geared towards the publication, but which is geared towards producing the data. And that is exactly what has happened under Corona. The articles that are produced are narratives on the data that were found and the correlations that were found, rather than standalone products. And that is, of course, why in the future publishing will become much more a complete package, scientific publishing, where with an article as one of the elements, and where all the rest will be as valuable as any article. Anyway, this is just some philosophical thinking of the future, but I think we are really witnessing a new dynamic of science, and not a new modus operandi, but a new dynamic, much more towards data-driven science. To wind up, so underlying a lot of the policies and the observations that I made are a few principles, and that is, first of all, if knowledge is a resource for societal progress, well, we must develop the policies that are needed to make sure that this knowledge is exploited to the benefit of all. We cannot simply have a situation whereby some actors control the majority of the research output in one way or another. This is simply not acceptable. And that is why, because it is not beneficiary, that is why initiatives like Open Science Cloud should be supported. There is also no way back to go to the old system of doing science. It simply is the ghost is out of the bottle. The situation has developed too far to go back to that, and there is absolutely no reason, because it is much more beneficiary for science to go to the new system of open science than to go back. And finally, there is, in order to make sure that the scientists in your part of the world, in every part of the world, get the most out of it, universities, libraries, and so forth should invest heavily in developing services to accompany and to support this transition, rather than trying to stop it. And that means investing a lot in knowledge management services and in data stewardship skills. And I'm sure that if people from libraries know this than me. So that is what I had to say on the topic. It is, of course, a wide-ranging topic. I tried to concentrate on the essence. If you really are interested in more details for the European policies, the details can be found in these two publications. So, muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much, Jean-Claude, for the great presentation on open science and open scholarship in Europe and beyond. We will now move to the questions, and so I'll do that with my colleague Claudia Vilches of the Hernán Santa Cruz Library of the United Nations. Claudia, go ahead.
Gracias, Jean-Claude. La primera pregunta que aparece es ¿por qué Latinoamérica no está representada en este Global Science Cloud you show, o sea, que mostraste. ¿Y cuáles son tus reflexiones o tu mirada al respecto?
Yes, well, that's also a question I had myself. As far as I know, there is no comparable initiative at regional level in Latin America, which you can find in other parts of the world, like even in Africa, where you have an African Open Science platform, you have an African Open Science Cloud, and so forth. Okay, these are all. It's not the same scale as in Europe, but it's still there are a lot of people working on it. So I know that there are. I'm not an expert in Latin America open science policy, by the way, but I know that there are things happening. But I think that a coordinated approach does not exist for the moment, and I don't see any reason why it shouldn't. Latin America is an important player in science. It has good universities, so I don't see any reason. And science is as important there as it is in the rest of the world. So I don't see any reason why it shouldn't be so. But I do not see either who should take the initiative or the lead there, because if you look at all these initiatives, they're not uniform. The way it is done in China is not the way it is done in Europe. It is not the way it is done in the US. It is not the way it is done in Africa. So it's all specific for the context, but it is missing indeed.
Gracias. Y en relación a la misma pregunta, Dominique Babini pregunta, ¿cómo se imagina the Latin American Open Science Cloud? Jan, we have a connection problem. We are losing you.
Do you hear me?
Better.
Yes, you're back now.
Okay, sorry. So probably someone didn't like what I said. So the way intuitively I think that should happen in Latin America is probably the way we did it in Europe. So you cannot impose a uniform system in Europe. We federated the national systems into one common approach, not on how it is done at the national level, but on how to work together at the supranational level, which means that every country can more or less do whatever they want to do on condition that the standards, the protocols, and so on are done in a way that it can function for everyone in the 28 other countries. Now that I think seems to me intuitively the best way to do for a continent like Latin America, but again, I'm not an expert in Latin America, where I think either to come up with one solution that is imposed somewhere by someone centrally. So, and the beauty of the federated approach is that you can repeat it at the global level on condition. Remember the parallel with air traffic, on condition that you agree on the basic parameters for the game.
Thank you, Jean-Claude. Wouter, tu turno.
Sí, Jean-Claude, Plan S, que tú conoces muy bien, y particularmente el rol de los APCs. ¿Cómo ves los APCs? Tú sabes que acá en la región, en América Latina y el Caribe, los APCs lo vemos como una fuente, o sea, no como una solución que resuelve las desigualdades que hay en términos de las instituciones con pocas o muchos recursos. Las instituciones con pocos recursos no tienen acceso a los journals. que ahora con los APCs eso se transfiere en se convierte en una desigualdad para los researchers, donde los researchers con pocos recursos no pueden publicar en los journals. ¿Cómo ves eso, los APCs?
Okay, in the ideal world, it should be free, but you cannot have a commercial service for free. That simply doesn't exist. I mean, if I go to a conference, I also pay for a ticket, no, to take the plane or take the train. Well, I think the same is here. And it's a little bit, you know, I'm pushed in by answering this. I'm considered to defend the interests of the editors, which is not per se the case. But I do not see how we can have professional journals for free. Why? Because you need to pay the whole system behind it. And I do not see why would I start a company if I cannot ask APCs? Huh? Now, this being said, should an investigador pay for the APCs? No, that's absolutely not what I'm saying. But just like libraries now pay for subscriptions, and poor libraries get a rebate, we could think of systems by, if we no longer have subscriptions because everything is open access, that money is used to create funds to pay for the APC. So that the money used for subscriptions is used for APC. So I do not see a way out of the APCs in terms, absolute terms, that it is a service for which you pay, and sometimes that service is very expensive, and you can discuss how expensive it is. But on the other hand, that doesn't mean, just like if I take a plane ticket, that I have to pay it from my pocket. So I think it is the responsibility of funders and universities to make sure that a percentage of what they fund is reserved for publication. On condition, of course, that it is not hybrid. I'm absolutely against the hybrid system whereby you pay for subscriptions and on top of it, you pay for the APCs to make it open access. In a system whereby the subscription is no longer existing, universities and funders should use that money to create funds to publish the APCs.
Ok, muchas gracias. Tú mencionaste los publishers tradicionales. Yo creo que tu posición, y corrígeme si estoy equivocado, es una posición muy pragmática en el sentido de tú celebras los avances, y a veces son pequeños, pero los avances que hacen los publishers tradicionales, en vez de decir, mira, no es suficiente, hay que hacer más y todo eso, no. Yo creo que tú en general celebras esos avances que se hacen, ¿no? ¿Cómo ves el rol de los publishers, los grandes publishers que todos conocemos, en ese ecosistema de open science?
Well, I think first of all, indeed, I'm very pragmatic in this because, like you, I'm a Belgian, so we are. But joke aside, it's more than pragmatism. If you see how, I think publishers have a vital role in the scientific ecosystem, because if we would not need them, if we would do it all ourselves, we would not need them. There simply isn't. I mean, researchers don't have time to do the things publishers do. So I think it is a bit stupid to imagine a world where we don't have them and they are an intermediary between research and making it public. And so they have a big role to play, and they have a very, I think they played a big role in in maintaining quality and so on. And I know that there are discussions there that it's not always reflecting quality, so it's a complicated discussion. But anyway, that's my position. I also think that if we read, so that the problems we have with the publishers, which is the dependency of the high impact journals, we can solve it tomorrow. If all universities tomorrow decide that the impact factor is no longer the only criterion or the least important criterion for hiring academics, there is absolutely zero incentive to try to publish in the high impact journals. Now, if you try to convince universities and scientists that that is no longer important, I tried it for 2 years, it is impossible. Then people start saying, yes, but you know, it's important for my career, for my curriculum, for my points. So it is a vicious circle. The publishers are important. They are probably much more important than they should be. And the only way to stop that over-importance is by diminishing the role of some of the parameters we use to evaluate researchers and funds. And that is what we as universities and funders control, but no one is willing to break that vicious circle. And so I think that's why I'm pragmatic. So I think that every move the publishers make towards an open access system, and I think we will be in full open access in 3-4 years to come. It goes so fast these days. But okay, that's a prediction. Now, every move they make, I welcome because it is moving in the right direction. In Europe, I always said, open access is not a discussion about money. Money is very important, but it is not on open access. It is about prices. Open access is a principle of accessibility, and in parallel, we should have the discussion about, are we willing to pay so much? And if not, what are we willing to do to break it?
So this has to do with monopoly?
Well, it has to do with oligopoly. You have 3 or 4 players dominating everything. But again, there is also choice. But show me one researcher who will not publish in Nature or in Science or in the Lancet. I never came across one saying, I will not do it. Why? Because if you publish journals, you almost have a tenure track to associate professor. You see, so that's the perversity of the system. And if you talk to the publishing houses, they will say, well, change the system and we follow. So it is a vicious circle.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jean-Claude. Claudia.
Jean-Claude, tú mencionaste algunos problemas en relación o problemas significativos de los preprints. ¿Podrías profundizar un poco eso, especialmente en tiempos de crisis y de pandemia donde han cobrado tanta importancia?
Okay, so the preprints have, as I indicated in the part. There is something on. Okay, shall I start again? So preprints in the corona research became quite important. You had an explosion of preprints. And you also had an explosion of the problems. Well, an explosion is saying a lot. You had a few problems because some of the articles were not robust enough, contain non-verified data and so forth. Now,
Perdimos a Jean-Claude. Jean-Claude, are you still there? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We don't see you, but we can hear you now again.
although, yeah, I cannot manipulate normally the video is on.
Yeah, but it says that you have low bandwidth.
Oh. Anyway,
no,
I will
no
go.
problem. We will go ahead. You're back.
So you heard about the preprints that I said that they will disappear? Did you hear that?
No, we didn't. We didn't hear that.
So I think preprints is something that will disappear because for the following reason. So preprints were important when the peer review time was excessively high, 1 to 2 years between submitting an article and getting it published. Now, what have we seen again in Corona? That these peer review times can be condensed to 4 to 6 weeks. So I do not think that the scientific world will accept, okay, now we go back to 2 years when Corona is. So editors, publishing houses have seen it can be done much faster. They have done a lot of investments to go there. They are investing in machine, or AI-based ways to do the first selections. So I think that the system will evolve to a much more faster publication. Now, if that is the case, you don't need the preprints anymore, except in some disciplines like in mathematics where it is standard practice, that will probably go on. But if my article gets published in 3 to 6 months, why would I bother for a preprint? And why would I, as a reader, take the risk of reading something that is not peer-reviewed if I know that if I wait a few weeks, it will be peer-reviewed?
Gracias, Jean-Claude. Nos movemos ahora a European Science Cloud y qué es lo que podemos aprender de ahí. ¿Cuál es, en tu opinión, el mayor valor añadido que de EOSC entrega a la comunidad científica europea?
Okay, so do you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so the main value of the European Open Science Cloud is that it will be the environment to manage the results of more than 100 billion of public money invested in research per year in Europe. And it will be done so in a way that it is open and reproducible. So we will not create a system whereby the data for which public money was used to create it will not be accessible to the scientific community and later on to the industry. And we will do it in a way that it allows faster science. So the first beneficiary of the Open Science Cloud is the scientific world, and
Te perdimos un segundo, Jean-Claude.
They are doing works in Claudia's building, so that's why we have some noise in the background there. Claudia, ¿tienes pregunta más?
Jean-Claude, otra pregunta en relación disculpa, a la gobernanza de EOSC. ¿Cómo hace para comprometer a las nuevas y las ya existentes comunidades de investigación? Y también, asociado a eso, ¿cuál es la aproximación que tiene EOSC al sistema actual de patentes y versus al movimiento de patentes abiertos?
well, with regard to patents, nothing will change. EOSC, in a certain sense, is a stupid system. It only guarantees that the traffic of data follows certain rules. It is not in itself creating products or scientific products. It might lead to the creation of services, data mining, data curation services, and so on. But anyone using EOSC can of course use it to file a patent, but EOSC in itself has nothing to say on that. It is a transmission layer. It is not the end stage of science nor the beginning. It is the layer in between. So the whole regime of patents will continue because it is the scientist and the university funder who determine that. What EOSC does is making sure that the data are accessible.
Muchas gracias, Jean-Claude. Wouter, por favor.
See, Jean-Claude. Jean-Claude, you said open access is becoming mainstream. The problem is not open access. The problem is the transition. And open data is a fact of research life. Now, would you agree that open access, open data, open science would not have happened without the European Commission being a funder on a regional level who can basically define the rules of the games for receiving funding? And is that something that possibly could explain why we don't have, for example, an open science cloud here in Latin America and the Caribbean, because we don't have this funder on a regional level?
I think it is probably so that because we are also funders and we have translated open data into the funding program of the Commission, that we got much more traction. You still hear me? Okay. But I must say, Wouter, and I will publish an article on it beginning of next year on the whole internal history of all this. It was, and because I had time to write it, it was a constant dialogue with member states, with universities, and so on. So I think if there is something the European Commission did well, is that we listened carefully to what was going on. We had hundreds of meetings and dozens of workshops, and we translated that into European policy. So we did not, at some point in time on a Friday afternoon, come up with a new policy proposal that no one suddenly was saying, hey, what is going on here? Actually, the whole idea of the Science Cloud was formulated on a seminar with bioscientists in 2016 and 2015. From all of Europe coming together, life science people, where we discussed this problem of, what are we going to do with this data-driven life science? And that's where the idea of this Open Science Cloud came up. So it was not an invention I did of my colleague, of my boss. It was translating what was living in the scientific community. But of course, you're right that first of all, we can use the carrot. Then the carrot is the funding program to make it develop faster. And secondly, the union has powers to, once this central policy is accepted, to impose it on the member states. And that's what you don't have in Latin America, as far as I know. So it is probably much more difficult to do it in your part of the world than it is in our part, and it was not an easy exercise here. But indeed, funding and then the structure of the EU, not to impose, but to accelerate what was going on the ground. And by the way, there are also rational things that have played. So from the inside, for me, 2018 key year, because that's when the scandals on the analytics happened, whereby research and other scandals, whereby research teams in the UK abused data on Facebook to do whatever. That had an enormous impact inside the policy-making community of Brussels, whereby suddenly people started to realize, but hang on, we cannot just produce all this data and then hope it will never be abused and will be used for the better. So I really saw, it's 2019, I really saw that moment, plus all the fake news and you know, the Russians on manipulating the American elections and so on. All these things have contributed that at some point in time, the science world and the political world started to converge on we must take control of this in one way or another. Now, if we would have had a Google or an Amazon, maybe we would not have been successful in pushing for EOSC, because most likely one would have said, well, you know, well, use those firms, they can do it. So it is really specific to the continent.
Right. Thank you very much. Mencionaste el concepto de confianza, trust, que es muy importante para los investigadores para compartir sus datos, especialmente sus datos. ¿Puedes explicar un poquito más cómo se traduce ese espacio de trust, de confianza en el European Open Science Cloud?
Well, first of all, the key principle is if data cannot be shared for privacy, security reasons, they will not be shared. They will be findable, they will be accessible, on condition that those producing them agree, and they will be interoperable and usable. But open is not meaning you just throw it in the air and then everyone can do what they want. So they are working on ways, and that's where FAIR is so important. They are working on ways to make sure that that kind of data is only used with the consent of the producer. And then secondly, trust is, of course, a result of the fact that the formats with which these data will be made available are uniform. So that I know as a researcher that what I put there falls under the same quality criteria as what you do. Otherwise, there would not be trust. Otherwise, it is winner takes all. And that's what we want to avoid. So it is a reciprocity system that creates the trust. And that is, by the way, also how the discussions in the global open science cloud are going. So it can only work if there is reciprocity. Latin America can access our cloud on the same conditions we can access your cloud. Otherwise, there is no trust.
Ok, muchas gracias. Claudia.
Más que preguntas, es comentarios respecto de los comentarios, también valga la redundancia, de Dominique Babini, que nos hace una reflexión sobre lo que está haciendo la referencia y Red Clara en Latinoamérica y en tiempo pasado, y el apoyo que se solicitó al BID en ese momento para la conformación de infraestructuras para el acceso abierto y la ciencia abierta. Y una reflexión que hace que efectivamente en Latinoamérica no hay múltiples alianzas regionales y no una dominante como en Europa, como es la Comisión Europea. Y eso realmente no solo en el ámbito de la ciencia abierta, sino también en el ámbito económico y también el social. Entonces, no sé qué reflexión nos podrías dar al respecto.
Well, no, I think that it's a bottleneck to make the continent move forward. Is that you don't have companies like in the US or big research institutions like in the US who can push it forward. You don't have political constructions like in Europe, the European Union, who can push for it, and which means that the only way that I can advise, but again, I mean, who am I to advise you people who are living in Latin America how to do things? But it's maybe there is some inspiration to be found in how it is done in Africa, where actually it is mainly one or two countries taking the lead and the rest following. And in the meantime, the African Organization of Unity or something, so the regional UN organization has jumped on it. So probably, but intuitively and without pretending that I know the solutions for the continent, I would say that if one or two or three countries in Latin America, and you have several who are scientific strong, would take the lead, my guess would be that once it is shown that it can go forward, that the rest will follow. And what we did as European Commission, we supported this African initiative with knowledge, with workshops, with money to kickstart it, and now it is under their own operation. So there are possibilities. There are international organizations like CODATA and RDA and GoFair who could be used to push and support it. But that's the only thing I can imagine, Claudia.
I agree with you. Totalmente de acuerdo, y bueno, los caminos no son fáciles para movernos en esa dirección. Wouter, por favor.
Okay. So you said open access saves lives in the context of the pandemic. Now, we know now that the COVID-19 related publications and data are currently temporarily made available in open access by the traditional journals, traditional publishers. How permanent is this change? Do you expect the publishers to close the paywalls again once the pandemic is over?
If I would be sure about the answer, I would probably be able to make a very nice consultancy fee. So, joke aside, my guess is that they will not close it for several reasons. So first of all, because COVID has generated 170,000 articles till now. I don't know how many are with the traditional journals, the traditional publishers, and the open access publishers, but my guess would be that the majority of it is with the traditional publishers. Now, if all these articles in the future pay an average APC, that's a very, very nice business. So it creates also business being open, because you publish an article very fast, I try to react on it later on and so forth. So that's the first reason. Secondly, I think if they would close it down, that would create, well, to be honest, we are not yet out of COVID, so it will go on for a few years, and then we have other pandemics. But close it down would create such a storm of critique in the world that it might lead to perverse effects that publishers are extremely afraid of, namely that everything gets stored on pirate sites like Science Hub, where already you have 65 million articles today. And thirdly, so I think the scientific community will not accept it anymore because they have seen the value of it. And thirdly, but there I speak on the basis of anecdotes, is that even the private sector, the pharma industry, has embraced open access. I know that there are discussions going on in Europe between big pharma groups to come up with a fair open data platform for their vaccine research. So if all that together makes me think that I think that it will be very unlikely that they will close it. And in the meantime, Elsevier is and the new CEO of Elsevier is pushing a lot towards open access. Springer Nature, as I said, announced this year significant changes towards open access. So it is simply too big to turn it back, and the boomerang effects, the negative boomerang effects, would be too big in my view.
Okay, and then the very last question. Can you say something to conclude about the role of open science in European economic recovery and transformation?
If I would know that answer, then I start a consultancy company. Because that is, of course, a very, very big and a very important answer. I think what we hope to achieve is that by opening up the knowledge stream created by a scientific system, which is in Europe 2 million researchers spending 120 billion a year on research, by opening up that knowledge stream to startups, to SMEs, that we create much faster the necessary economic incentives to restart the economy, to create new companies, and so on. Because, I mean, in Europe, we also have a big push towards green and climate change. Now, if all that, so there are a lot of people now out of work. If all these people, if some of them get inspired by the latest research on alternative energy and do a startup, well, we created something that is sensible. But it's an indirect, of course, effect of open science on the recovery. But and I don't know how you would be able to factor that, but it is important, I think, yes.
All right. Thank you so much. This was the last question. Thank you so much, Jean-Claude, for your time. And as always, we will share your, if you agree, we will share your presentation and the recording of this webinar with basically with everybody. So will be shared through our website. I think it was really. Go ahead.
It's copyright protected, everything I do.
That's what I was imagining after you were talking about consultancy. Yeah. All right. So no, that's very much appreciated. Thank you so much. And no, I think this was really a great conversation. A conversation between Europe and Latin America and the Caribbean in some way. So I hope you also enjoyed it. And we enjoyed it a lot. There was a lot of questions, and this obviously is not a conversation or a dialogue that finishes here. This is something that hopefully we will continue in some way or another. So thanks again for that. And I would say to everybody who participated in the session today, thank you so much for being there. Muchas gracias por estar ahí. Todas las personas que participaran en este webinar. Con eso cerramos este webinar, agradeciendo a Jean-Claude Burgelman y a los colegas de la Biblioteca Hernán Santa Cruz de Naciones Unidas y todos que participaron en este webinar, y que les vaya muy bien. Cuídense mucho, take care, stay safe. And we'll be in touch. Thank you so much, Jean-Claude.
Okay,
Muchas gracias, Jean-Claude.
Hasta la próxima.
Un placer, sí.
Chao.
Hasta la próxima.
Chao.
Chao.